Something that I found myself more and more interested in lately is learning in languages. En fait, en tant que Canadien, je peux aussi parler un peu français. Alors, à propos, quelle langue tous les premiers ministres du Canada pourraient-ils parler? One would be completely right and sane to assume that the Canadian Prime Ministers could speak, well, both English and French. But our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, couldn't speak a word of French. In fact, he only spoke English and Scottish Gaelic, and he spoke a bit of Latin. Who knows how that bit could have been? And it's the same thing with his successor. Alexander Mackenzie spoke English and Scottish Gaelic, and he likely spoke the Scots language. Look, mate, there's just not that much information about Canadian prime ministers online, especially not these niche details. There's probably some about frickin' William Henry Harrison, but there's nothing about our prime ministers, and that makes me sad. And then our third prime minister, Sir John Abbott, didn't even speak any English. Yeah, I guess he just got fed up with Johnny MacDonald and Alexander Mackenzie's inability to talk to him. So he didn't really speak much English, but he did speak proficient French. He was born, raised, and buried in Montreal, Quebec. Okay, enough with being interesting. Our next two prime ministers, Sir John Thompson and Sir Mackenzie Bowell, only spoke English. Man, if you live in Canada, you should speak at least another language. And next up, our shortest serving prime minister, Sir Charles Tupper, who spoke the most amount of languages. He was fluent in English, Greek, Latin, and French. Nowadays, if you were to learn Greek and Latin, you would be laughed at. Idiot. Sir Wilfrid Laurier, having grown up in Quebec, spoke fluent French, and he was also our first French Canadian Prime Minister. Although Laurier, who was never really too far away from Ottawa, always spoke English. While Sir Robert Borden may be my least favorite of all the Canadian Prime Ministers, I've got to commend him on him being able to be fluent in three languages. Of course, English being one of them, but French was not one of them. The other two were Greek and Latin. But going back to boring monolingualism, we had three prime ministers in a row who couldn't speak anything other than English: Arthur Meehan, William Lyon Mackenzie King, and R.B. Bennett. However, William Lyon Mackenzie King may or may not have been able to speak a little bit of German. So even if he was, it wouldn't have been that much. And now we get a little bit of fresh air before we get into more monolingualism. We have Louis Saint Laurent here, who spoke French as his first language, being from Quebec, of course, and he also spoke English as a second language, fluently. And now we have our final two monolingual prime ministers, those being John G. Diefenbaker and Lester B. Pearson. Lester B. Pearson actually felt bad that he was monolingual, and he hoped that every single prime minister after him could speak English and French, and every single one since then has spoken English and French, except for one. Pierre Elliott Trudeau actually made Canada officially a bilingual country, and since he grew up in Quebec, he also spoke French and English. Joe Clark's first language was English, and during his prime ministership, he was reportedly learning French, so I'm gonna count that as him being bilingual. If you listened to Brian Mulrooney talk, in English of course, you would never have known that he was born and raised in northeastern Quebec. So he spoke French and very, very well English for someone who it's not their first language. Kim Campbell's time as Prime Minister may not be the most acclaimed, but she does get credits for being the only Prime Minister to be able to speak Russian. And that was because she was a spy kicking Russian. I'm just kidding. She was a Sovietologist or something like that. So, yeah, she could speak English, French, and Russian. Jean Chrétien, our prime minister with possibly the most French sounding name, obviously spoke French as his first language. Could he speak English? Yes. Could he speak English with a French accent? Yes. He didn't really speak English like I'm speaking English to you right now. Paul Martin spoke English as his first language and went to a French middle school because his parents wanted him to improve his French. And Stephen Harper is the first prime minister since Lester Pearson to not speak French fluently. In fact, he is bilingual, but his second language is Spanish. And that's because he tried to get Canada working with Latin American countries. So he was trying to learn their language. He was trying to learn French as prime minister, but it didn't sound very, proper.
Conservateur réélu va s'engager à collecter des données sur les acquisitions par des étrangers non résidents de biens immobiliers, I'm going to try that again.
Justin Trudeau practically bounced between Quebec and Ontario his whole life, so he grew up speaking both of the languages. So there you go. That's how many languages the prime ministers could speak. How many languages can you speak? I want to hear from you.